It's 4 minutes after 10. A very good morning indeed to you. And at risk of adding to your already considerable burdens, I've waited 24 hours to say this because I did wonder whether it might be a Monday morning malaise. So I've waited until Tuesday morning to see if it is still in place, in which case it cannot be attributable to the fact that it is Monday morning. But it's becoming rather hard to know where to start. I don't know if you find this, and I wonder now that I worry that I shouldn't tell you this because perhaps you rely upon me to make these decisions. But it's very hard to know where to start. Everything's gone completely bonkers. You have the legal action now poised to take place in response to the British government's determination to break international law. That was the will of the people 10 minutes ago. That deal that Boris Johnson got through Parliament a few days after becoming Prime Minister, I beg your pardon, a few days after winning the last general election, that was the will of the people, this withdrawal agreement. David Frost got a peerage for it. And now it's so absolutely awful, we're going to have to break international law to get out of it and pretend that the European Union are somehow to blame for the self-inflicted mess. Just take a moment sometimes. You have to, I think. Do you agree? Sometimes you have to just double-check that everything is as absolutely crackers as your sort of waters tell you. So, I mean, that's just bonkers. Northern Ireland is economically the best performing part of the United Kingdom, give or take a London, at the moment. And yet that is apparently a situation so dire that their economic circumstances must be changed. A move so major that it will enrage, well, no, not just enrage, it will entail a breaking of international law. A majority of MPs that would be sitting in Stormont if the DUP hadn't thrown its rattle out of the pram, actually oppose what the British government is planning to do. It's just insane. It's absolutely crackers. Is there an analogy for this? Is there a sort of like Emperor's New Clothes type scenario that we can employ where you look at the news? John Redwood today. Well, we can't even go there. John Redwood on Twitter talking gibberish. I mean, genuine gibberish. It's not even worthy of repeating and analysing and pointing out why it's gibberish. It is literally as if he sat on his phone and by an astonishing miracle of buttock-based technology, actual words emerged on a screen and he pressed send. Gibberish to the left of me, gibberish to the right of me. And then you come to the economic situation that the country is facing, regardless. Daily Mail today has tried to write an article claiming that none of our problems have got anything to do with Brexit. That's just hilarious. It's absolutely bonkers. It's beyond rational analysis. It is literally as if you are standing in the middle of a field, soaking wet, with huge amounts of water landing on your head, having been precipitated high above you and falling down in droplets, claiming that it's not raining. It is as if you are Rudy Giuliani, with your hair dye dribbling down the side of your face, standing there insisting that you don't wear hair dye. It's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. Everywhere you turn, the bonkersness is increasingly off the scale. And still these people queue up to claim that he's getting all the big calls right. It's hilarious. We have more job vacancies than we have unemployed people, and a large proportion of the unemployed people are not looking for work anyway because they can't. It's incredible. And yet here we are. And then you come to Rwanda, a policy so utterly and blatantly disgusting, so deliberately disgusting, that you wonder why every bishop in the country has bothered putting pen to paper this morning to write to the Times to condemn it. I'm going to read you that letter in a minute. Listen, you probably don't believe in God. Goodness knows. It's a tricky concept at the best of times, and it has historically led into all sorts of choppy waters. But there was some pride, wasn't there, once to be derived from the claim that we were a country that at least followed the Christian tradition. I always think of Bill and Ted at this point in proceedings, and their distillation of the Christian message, of course, right down to its barest bones, namely, be excellent to each other. Be excellent to each other. Turn the other cheek, whatever it may be. New Testament messaging from Jesus Christ, whether you believe in God or not, was philosophically a thing of absolute and unparalleled beauty. I say unparalleled. I was raised in the Christian faith. I'm sure other faiths are paralleled beauties. But for me, there was some pride in the fact that we were a Christian country, or we claimed to be a Christian country. But then you have people like, I popped up on a list. Did I tell you about this? The strangest list, perhaps, I've ever popped up on. the Catholic Herald or a Catholic newspaper did a list of the country's most prominent Catholic. Yeah, you know how this story ends, right? Did a list of the country's most prominent Catholics. And there I was. So next stop, probably sainthood, isn't it? After that, you should imagine Keith start a petition. And I looked at some of the other people on the list, and obviously my Christian leanings made me a little bit reluctant to suggest that some of the other people on the list had no right whatsoever to be there. But if you're presiding over and defending this Rwandan refugee scheme, I don't think you get to call yourself a Christian, frankly. It's the polar opposite of what Jesus taught. It's disgusting. It's as if the parable of the Good Samaritan ended with the Good Samaritan being stuck on a plane and sent to Rwanda. It's incredible. And there we are. Shall I read you the whole letter and then we'll decide what angle we're going to take on this together this morning? I don't do this very often. I'm a big enemy of reading on the radio. If ever anyone is stupid enough to ask me for advice on how to do this job, I always say don't read anything out. Don't even read your introductions at the top of the hour, because people can tell. No one wants to be read to, unless it's a book. But anyway, I'm going to read you a letter, which is from the Most Reverend Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York, Dame Sarah Mullally, the Bishop of London, the Right Reverend Paul Butler, the Bishop of Durham, and another 20 Lords Spiritual. So the 21, 2, 3, is that 4 or 5? Anyway, all the head honchos and honchettes of the Church of England, every single one of them has signed up to this letter. Sir, they write to the Times today, whether or not the first if the Times gets a female editor at some point, will they have to change that to madam? They will, won't they? Will they? Won't they? Will they? All right, not the most pressing question before us this morning. Sir, whether or not the first deportation flight leaves Britain today for Rwanda, we'll just pause there for a moment to reflect upon the likelihood of this government sending the plane if there's only one person on it, or no people. And Priti Patel will be on the telly tomorrow to say that the main thing is that the plane took off. You say there wasn't anyone on it. The main thing is that the plane is currently flying to Rwanda, she will say, with her rather endearing habit of not pronouncing G's. It's flying to Rwanda, she might say. And Sadiq Khan would then oppose the fact that the plane is flying to Rwanda. Why are you drawing attention to the way they speak, James? Answer, because later in the programme we're going to be having a look at the possibility of street slang becoming the most common language, if you like, on the streets of this country within the next 100 years. The amazing thing is about these introductions is that I remember what the general thread is, even as I go off on these ridiculous tangents. So what do you reckon would happen if there were none left, if all the legal challenges were successful and provoked at least postponements of deportations? Would they still, looking at this government, knowing what you know, do you think they'd still send the flight ahead if there was one refugee on the plane? Yeah, you do, don't you? They would, wouldn't they? What about none? I can't quite imagine them doing that. The main thing is, if it wasn't for those pesky kids, that plane would be full of refugees. Not the ones we like from Ukraine, but the ones we don't like from places like Afghanistan and Syria and Iran. No refugees at all on the plane? Will the plane still take? I can't get an hour out of that, can I? Can I get an hour out of that? Do you think the plane will take off if there aren't any refugees on it? Anyway, I digress. Back to the letter from all the bishops. And I mean all the bishops, not a figure of speech. This is literally all the bishops. Sir, whether or not the first deportation flight leaves Britain today for Rwanda, this policy should shame us as a nation. Rwanda is a brave country recovering from catastrophic genocide. The shame is our own, because our Christian heritage should inspire us to treat asylum seekers with compassion, fairness and justice, as we have for centuries. I'd probably dispute that last bit a little bit. Well, we have sometimes over the centuries. Those to be deported to Rwanda, and this is the important bit, have had no chance to appeal or reunite with family in Britain. They have had no consideration of their asylum claim, recognition of their medical or other needs, or any attempt to understand their predicament. Many are desperate people fleeing unspeakable horrors. Many are Iranians, Eritreans, and Sudanese citizens who have an asylum grant rate of at least 88%. These are the people Jesus had in mind, as he said, when we offer hospitality to a stranger, we do it for him. They are the vulnerable that the Old Testament calls us to value. We cannot offer asylum to everyone, but we must not outsource our ethical responsibilities or discard international law which protects the right to claim asylum. We must end the evil trafficking. Many churches are involved in fighting it. This needs global cooperation across every level of society. To reduce dangerous journeys to the UK, we need safe routes. The Church will continue to advocate for them. But deportations and the potential forced return of asylum seekers to their home countries are not the way. This immoral policy shames Britain. That's not, I'm afraid, open to debate. That's just true. But as we discussed yesterday at some length, that's the point. Those of us that despise this policy for moral, ethical reasons, or even religious reasons, if you want to go with the bishops. We agree with the people that applaud it that it's disgusting. We just hate it in the way that other people love it. Some people love this idea. You can see the figure of speech already returning to social media. People like David Lammy, it is suggested, should be deported to Rwanda. It's the sort of 21st century equivalent of send them back where they came from, which I've always felt Lenny Henry dealt with best by saying, great, yeah, I'm from Dudley. I want you to tell me, from whatever perspective you please, let's imagine that, let's say 5 people are on that plane at a cost of about 100 grand per head. Okay, and then of course all the money, the 120 million quid that we've paid, I think, to the Rwandan government to process these applications. What will success look like? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And I tried to ask this question yesterday, but I got a bit sidetracked by the realization, if you like, or the revelation that we actually all agree on this. The people who despise the policy and despise racism, and the people who love the policy because they are racist. We all agree. It's absolutely disgusting what's being done to these people. The difference is some people take pleasure from seeing disgusting things being done to these people, and some people feel great pain and sorrow when they witness it. But we're all looking at the same thing. So that debate's over. What does success look like is part of the question. But here's the thing. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to tell me why they're doing it. It's such a mess. It's probably illegal in large part. And I'll give you one example of somebody whose ticket was cancelled yesterday. Just one example. An Iranian police officer who fled his own country after being, I think, tortured for refusing to open fire on protesters. He fled the regime after refusing an order to shoot protesters. He fears he'll be assassinated if he is deported to Rwanda, and said he would prefer to die now than endure not knowing his fate, in an impassioned plea to the government. That's an Iranian former policeman who fled the regime after refusing to shoot civilian protesters. That's the kind of person that we're deporting. As the bishops pointed out, we're deporting people from countries that have approximately an 88% asylum success rate. These are not the mythical ghouls of Nigel Farage's fetishistic imagination. These are not the fever dreams of the Daily Mail comment section. That's who they are. We seem to have selected them at random, with no particular interest in the validity of their case or the likelihood of their application succeeding. Here is what is happening, in my humble opinion, and then we'll open up the phone lines. Okay? This has been done solely for front pages. It is not designed to break the business model of people traffickers, because it turns the British government into people traffickers. The idea that you somehow prevent people trafficking by becoming people traffickers is absolutely up there with all the other crazy stuff that's going on at the moment. That is, by the way, an opinion. It's not necessarily a fact, and therefore you are welcome to challenge it. But the simple question of why are they doing this when it is unlikely to make the blindest bit of difference to anything, except, of course, make it more likely that if anyone does get here, they're considerably less likely to put their head above the parapet and put in a proper asylum claim. They're much more likely to disappear into the black economy, where they will be exploited and possibly worse. So what does success look like from the government's point of view or from yours, if you quite like this idea? For, the most obvious reason being that you hate foreigners or that you believe propaganda. Why are they doing it, and what does success look like? 0345 6060 973. And if you want to have a crack at the question I started with, we can't call ourselves a Christian country, can we, for as long as this policy is in place? We simply can't. You are allowed to disagree with that as well, but I'd be amazed and fascinated to hear how you'd even start to do so. It is 21 minutes after 10, and that, even by my standards, was a fairly lengthy introduction. So let's dive straight into the calls. Why are they doing this, and what does success look like? That the British government becoming people traffickers and temporarily, I hope, kissing goodbye to any claim that this country can describe itself as Christian. Carla is in Bath. Carla, what would you like to say?
Well, I totally agree. We're not Christians, are we?
Well, you are, all right.
No, I'm not.
Okay, but the country can't claim to be.
I'm a humanitarian.
Yes.
So, I have feelings and cares for people. But one of the things I did want to mention, yesterday, I don't know who it was, but someone said that the difference between Ukrainian refugees and other refugees, Syrians, Afghanistan, is that they want to go home eventually. Well, how do they not know that the others want to go home eventually too?
Well, if your country is safe and prospering, one imagines the temptation to return would be felt equally across all nationalities. I'm sure if the regime in Iran changed, this policeman who had to flee the country, I think leaving his wife and children behind, would love to return to Iran if he wasn't worried about being thrown into jail or killed. So
yes,
I do.
Exactly.
I'm always slightly wary of picking apart points that haven't been made on this programme because I didn't witness the point being made, and it sounds like it was made by an idiot. So I wouldn't necessarily give them oxygen on here, and if I did, I'd be able to kneecap them before they'd finish speaking. So
no, I totally.
But that's one of the lines that's been wheeled out, is it? Well, this is just a way of avoiding saying no. The Ukrainians are white.
Yeah.
Carla.
Well, yeah.
I think we both know that.
I think we all know
that. I know, and you're right. These contortions are fascinating. What's the difference between the Ukrainian refugees and the Syrian refugees? Skin colour. I can't say that out loud, obviously, because, I'm not ready to admit that yet publicly. But obviously it's skin colour. What can I say in order to pretend that it isn't? And then Carla's heard someone suggest it's no, the Ukrainians all want to go back to Ukraine. Whereas this fellow who's left his wife and children in Iran would like nothing more than to be living in a bedsit in Blackpool for the rest of his life. 23 minutes after 10. Nothing wrong with Blackpool, by the way. Don't get me mixed up with that Conservative MP from the other day. Ian is in Leicester Square. Oh, speak up a bit, mate. I'll be able to hear you without a phone.
Yeah, open the window. I'll shout over to James.
What would you like to say?
You've just shot my fox, unfortunately. It's all about skin colour. It is. There was somebody. I was listening to something earlier on, and somebody was saying about the Ukrainians. Oh, I offered a room for Ukrainian, and he just didn't go that far. But I wouldn't for these guys, and it's because they're brown or they're black.
Yes,
and it's simple. It's just simple racism.
I know that. You know that. I think that's counting. I don't think that counts as opinion anymore. What does success look like in this context then for somebody like that, or for the government? Because we can't read minds, but we can perhaps analyse policy. If the plane takes off with, let us say, 5 people on it, is that a win?
I think it's a win if it takes off with no passengers on it. I think that they would love it. I don't know where it's taking off from, but they'd love it to go out on telly and on with rendition of "God Save the Queen."
But there's no. Well, they can't do that because Prince Charles has called it appalling. So
or "Land of Hope and Glory," whatever they're wanting to put out. I think Liz Truss was at question this morning, wasn't she? And she said that it was a matter of principle, so they were basically checking the route out. And then she was told, well, hold on a minute, this is costing X number of thousands of pounds. Well, it's the principle of it. And that's all they want. They want that to see that to go in the air, so the racist base will say, well, there you go, it's started now, so we're starting to deport people. We've not had anybody on this plane, but that's the first of many.
They wouldn't. I mean, it would be quite good for comic effect if they let it take off without any refugees on it. But I don't think they would. I mean, although you look at some of the stuff people have been persuaded to believe. He got all the big calls right. The point about this plane was never actually having refugees on it, they might say. You'd send out, who would you send out to do this one? Who's sort of top of the list? Grant Shapps would have a go at this one. No. What you have to understand is that the point of this policy was never to actually have refugees on that plane. It's merely the symbolic significance of watching the plane take to the skies above the white cliffs of Dover, and the thought that it could be full of people fleeing Eritrea or Iran or Syria. That was I mean, they could have a go at it. You put nothing past them these days. They're trying to dismantle the will of the people in the House of Commons this week, less than 3 years after insisting that it was oven ready. Peter is in Nantwich. Peter, what does success look like?
Well, first of all, I don't think that this policy is a surprise that it's happening this week. We've got a by-election next week, and they've got to have some sort of point to something and say we are doing something. We're doing something about it. And the problem they've also got is that when they go on about this being a Christian country, which it is, I mean, the head of the Church of England is the Queen.
Yeah.
We've got an array of bishops that are lining up to say that it's wrong,
and the law, of course, as well. So, or judges whose job it is to interpret the law of the land. So you've essentially got the three of the biggest institutions this country has ever created opposed to it, passionately opposed to it.
Absolutely, and the problem you've got is that everybody in the country will say, last week we had a film that was banned because it was an Islamic film.
Yes, it wasn't banned. It was withdrawn by one cinema chain.
It was withdrawn. But we had all these people that wrapped themselves up in the Union flag, jumping up and down and saying this is a Christian country. Are those people standing up today and saying it's a Christian country? They're not. They're saying, who do these bishops think they are? These are sort of things that because it suits them on one hand to say they're a Christian country because it's bashing anybody that's foreign. Yet today they don't want to be jumping up and down about that because it's going to make them look racist. But
does it work if, let's say, there are 5 people on the plane, and your suggestion is that it is an electoral ploy? It might be, but people would have to come up with a detailed account of why the timing is a coincidence in order to refute your claim. If there are 5 people, is it merely the fact that they've tried to do it and they've talked about it a lot and they've upset all the Liberals? That's the electoral boost, is it? Or is it linked to the number of people on the actual plane?
What they haven't told everybody is that if you look at that MOU between Rwanda and the British government,
yes,
you look at that MOU, Section 2, subsection 16.1, go and have a look at it.
Yes.
We actually got to take...
No, I know that. I don't know that that's quite the gotcha everybody thinks it is. I mean, I know people are pointing it out because the ones cheering the planes leaving are not exactly the kind of people you'd expect to be cheering the planes landing with Rwanda's most vulnerable refugees aboard. And you're right to remind us that it's highly likely that a lot of the cheerleaders are unaware of that fact. But I do worry unintentionally that it lends itself to the sense that that's somehow unwelcome. I think it's wonderful that we're inviting Rwanda's most vulnerable refugees here. But you're right to remind us that the people cheering the thought of an Iranian policeman in fear for his life being deported to Rwanda are less likely to be delighted by the news that we're also going to be taking Rwanda's most vulnerable refugees into this country under the terms of this incredible treaty. Peter, thank you. I guess that's the point, isn't it? Success is not going to be numerical. I think probably failure might be. If it's got 0 people on the plane, it's not going to be a success in any measurable sense. But as an intangible, the fact that they can, the Mail will do what the Mail always does and turn on absolutely everybody, whether it's the bishops or the royal family or junior doctors or train drivers they just hate everybody. It's a wonderful business model. It's quite fair, actually, I suppose. It's quite equal opportunities. Everybody is fair game, even Conservative prime ministers, of course, if they're not bonkers enough. But is the conversation the victory? That's what worries me. It's why I haven't spoken about it really until this week when I felt we had no choice. 0345 6060973. And come at it from the Christian angle if you want. Tell me why you think this doesn't rob us of the right to call ourselves a Christian country for as long as this government remains in place or this policy remains in the pipeline. 0345 6060 973. It's 10:30, and Dominic Ellis is here with your headlines. 33 minutes after 10 is the time. Mike's been in touch. Mike's texted to say if they have one person on plane, it will be gate. I think it obviously means great. He's just put G and then 8 next to it. And I mean, Mike exists, I think. There are Mikes out there. One person would be great. So that means Mike thinks that £500,000 or £600,000 to deport one refugee to Rwanda under a legal framework that means that they might have to bring him back in a month after the big court hearing occurs. That's in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Mike thinks that's a good thing. That's money well spent. And listen, I mean, it's easy to rip the mickey out of Mike. I mean, really, really easy. But he exists. His vote's worth the same as yours. And that analysis that this doesn't have anything to do with how many people are on the plane is valid. So what does success look like? 0345 6060 973. And given that it's such an almighty mess, why are they doing it? Liz is in Cricklade. Liz, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Liz.
Success on a plate for the Tories is that all of the blame for the immigrants still being here and making people believe that all of their problems are emanating from immigrants, particularly brown and black immigrants, is the fault of the left liberal.
Is that landing, do you think? I mean, I know the Mail have got it on their front page every day, but this is the same newspaper that had High Court judges as enemies of the people not long ago, and a big picture of Theresa May when they thought she was the answer to all their fever dreams under the headline Crush the Saboteurs. So, you know, that sort of house journal of absolute madness notwithstanding. Is it landing? I mean, does it work politically if nobody gets deported and they paint targets on the back of lawyers, which, of course, the security services have asked politicians to stop doing that after at least one act of terror was committed in a lawyer's office, but they haven't paid much attention to that.
It is landing with certain people,
okay.
But it also means that actually... It's yes, but like Mike, and I mean, I spent yesterday speaking to one lady who had a pair of secateurs in her hand, and I thought she was going to attack me with them because she's so cross, and it's all our fault.
Right.
And you know, and it's to do with we tried to steal Brexit from them, and now we're stealing this, you know, this solution, which they see as part of the solution.
And if you told her about,
so you can't get through to them.
No, but if you told her about this policeman and what he was fleeing, would she still be convinced, or would that be cherry picking? And then there's all the ones that I haven't got any details about, but they must be really awful.
The acceptance of the dehumanisation because of the anger means that they don't have any empathy, and it's all about, well, I've got such a bad time, it's so difficult for us, and we have to come first, and we should stop paying all that foreign aid, and the same cocktail is in there. But I do believe that the other sort of softer voter that was taken in with Brexit in general election 19 to vote for Boris are repulsed by it. And they're, you know, you can see that they're like, oh my goodness, this is really uncomfortable.
That's why I asked if it was landing.
It means their base is dwindling.
Yeah, you know, that's what intrigues me by it, because I certainly wouldn't say that everybody who voted for Brexit will be in favour of deporting refugees in fear of their life. I categorically don't believe that for a minute. But then again, if you put the emphasis in the other direction and you find people who are in favour of this disgusting policy, I think the likelihood that they also voted for Brexit in order to get rid of foreigners is probably pretty high. So it's one of those lenses, isn't it, that casts a different light in different directions. Thank you, Liz. Sean's in Dublin, so will I be on Friday night. Sean, what would you like to say?
How you doing, James? Yeah, I'm just back to success. Success is going to be one refugee on that plane.
Is it?
That's
is
the
it?
way they're going to.
You reckon? I'm not so sure.
They will
Go
look
on.
at it, because once there is one on it, look what we've done. We've tried. They will then start blaming the left-wing lawyers. We tried and think. Now, it's nothing to do with the lawyers. You need to drop the ERS. It's to do with the law. And then you have the implementation of the law, which which the judges will be working off.
Yes.
Now we're back to that horrible headline, I think it was on the Mail a while back, where it had the judges are the people that are the enemies of the state. And it comes back to that. But we tried our best. Look, we tried. We had 151, down to 50. And this is the thing. They will spin the success in one. It's a bit like the way they've worked on Brexit now. Brexit is now, it's a Remainers Brexit. They'll turn everything to suit themselves.
That was only David Davis. So I don't think, again, it's so hard to be generous, isn't it? But it's important to try. They're not all as mad as David Davis, are they, and John Redwood? Lots of people who voted for it, whether they've seen the light yet
Redwood
or not.
Was incredible this morning. What the nonsense he tweeted. I like the bum analogy that you had
with the phone. I mean, you can't. So I mean, yeah. I guess if someone doesn't want to be lumped into the same categories as David Davis and John Redwood and Nadine Dorries and the rest of them, then it's up to them to speak up and explain what makes them different. So all right, I'll give you that. So one person on the flight works as a win because we have. See, the thing about the law is that it applies to everybody. I mean, it's like levels of membership, isn't it, in a club? So if you're a British citizen, some laws will apply to you that don't apply to other people. You know, for example, the right to live here or just stay here without having to go through any application process or jump through any hoops. But some laws apply to you just because you're human. It's like a lower level of membership that applies to all humans. And there's no logical reason why any human would want fewer human rights. But then again, we're living in a country that has imposed economic sanctions on itself. James is in Brentwood. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I definitely agree with you on the root aim of the policy is just pandering to the...
It's noise, isn't it? It's about making noise more than about making people
one
move.
Thing, I did want to pull you up on one thing, though.
Sure.
When you were talking about that tweet from Mike, you said his vote counts the same as the rest of us.
Yeah.
And that's not true. My vote basically doesn't count where I live because it's
a slightly pedantic point, and I will counter it because I can a pedant with the best of them by claiming that I was referring to the referendum at that point in the programme, James.
Right.
So stick that in your pipe of pedantry and puff on it.
But I did want to call you out as well because I'm a big fan of your show.
Yes.
Most of the things you say, but I never hear you talk about
the first past the post stuff. It's on my list, actually. I think it's increasingly hard. I was thinking this at the weekend for not to support it when you look at how a small number, well, also when you look at what some MPs with massive majorities can get away with now, and the idea that they never, ever, ever have, if you like, any sort of form of democratic accountability. I would agree with you on that, but it's not the day for that today, I don't think, unless I suppose we would.
I know a lot of these issues come about because of the current undemocratic system, though. That's how they get away with it. It's how the Tories kind of cheat their way into power.
So that aside, then, what does success look like for you? I mean, one person on the plane, 5 people.
Yeah, one person will be enough that can. Even if it all fails, they'll try to spin it as, oh, look what the wokeists have done. They've stopped us, supporting these foreigners, these terrorists, and all the things they usually do. They're spinning the whole war on woke thing to get people
by deporting a police.
Getting
the juices flowing, as it were, by deporting a police officer or trying to deport a police officer who fled Iran after refusing to shoot protesters, because we don't want people like that in this country. In fact, that's not even funny, is it? Priti Patel probably doesn't want people like that in this country. What do you mean you refuse to shoot protesters? That's ridiculous. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. So what does success look like? Why are they doing it? Jim's in Watford. Jim, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Well, one potential way of looking at this is, yes, we've got immigration into this country. We've got to offer these people a very safe and secure way of seeking asylum and going through the natural process then of whether they're legitimate or not. But perhaps one element to look at here is purely the cost of it. And by all accounts, it's costing £5 million a day. So 5 million a day, 365 days in the year, that's just under 2 billion. So when you take the
what's costing that?
So by all accounts, the government is.
Well, what do you say by all accounts? I don't mean which accounts.
Well, the government actually says that immigration costs £5 million a day.
No, it doesn't. I mean, immigration is a net positive for the British economy. You must be talking about a specific...
No, looking after asylum seekers.
Well, that's nothing to do with immigration, is it? Immigration is everybody who wasn't born here but currently works here and the financial contribution that they make to the country. So if you want to, by all accounts, we'd have to do a calculation there, wouldn't we? And also, I'm very much in favour of letting asylum seekers work, as they are permitted to do in other countries, in which case the cost becomes zero overnight. So we've solved that problem.
I have no problem with that. If once they've actually proved who they are and what they are, because our borders aren't
they can
safe
work. They can work. They can work while the application is being processed.
Well, I work in the military.
In other countries.
Well, I work in the military, and part of my role is to keep this country safe.
Yes.
So by doing that, when you're actually seeing people actually rolling up on your doorsteps without any paperwork, and there is a huge amount of military.
But they're not going to go through the application process, are they? Under your scheme, they're just going to disappear into the black economy, and that of course won't cost the country anything.
Not at all. But anybody that's arriving in this country without paperwork, that's seeking asylum, for instance, we need to put them through a process. Now, one way of looking at this, what success could be like, is to reduce the cost of that.
Well, you keep going on about this, but the cost of sending them to Rwanda, as opposed to letting them work while they're being processed here, is going to be immeasurably higher.
Well,
I mean, I'm sure you don't mean to, but you sound like someone who's desperately trying to come up with a theory that doesn't sound callous and racist to justify something that actually appeals to you on a more base level. But I'm sure you're not. No, absolutely. I'm categorically sure you're not. I'm just warning you that that's what you sound like.
It's just one way of looking at it.
But it isn't, though, is it? We've just established that this is a pointless argument, which is why it sounds a little bit like a fig leaf designed to disguise something uglier, because you can reduce the costs of asylum applications overnight by letting asylum applicants work and earn a crust and even pay perhaps some taxes. And the cost of sending them to Rwanda, if there are 5 people on the plane tonight, is going to be £100,000 per capita. So how does that save us money?
But that's assuming those people that are arriving in this country without any paperwork.
Well, you keep saying that they're arriving without any paperwork. So what do we do? This Iranian fellow, this Iranian policeman, presumably arrived with his Iranian passport, and they're trying to deport him. So again, it's one of those figures of speech that I keep hearing from people who seem to be desperately trying to sound, well, that's not beat about the bush, Jim. It's like a phrase that's used by people who are desperate to pretend they're not just racist. So what do we do with this Iranian police officer? He's got his passport with him. Why are you talking about people who haven't got any papers when he was supposed to be on the plane today?
Well, once you've established who and what they are, but you firstly need to establish who and what they are.
Well, that's what we do. That's the asylum application process.
Yes.
And he's still getting deported.
You're not being deported.
Mate, his ticket was cancelled yesterday. If it wasn't for those lefty lawyers, he'd be in Rwanda tonight.
They're not deporting them. What they were actually doing is moving them off country into a safe place while they actually go through their process of seeking asylum in this country.
Yes, and if it succeeds, no, Jim, you've misunderstood that as well. If the application succeeds, they stay in Rwanda, Jim.
No, they have. Well, that's not what my understanding. And my understanding is,
mate, with respect, I don't care what your understanding is. I deal in the facts. If the application is successful, they stay in Rwanda. So your whole support for this scheme is based upon ignorance.
I wouldn't say that at all, James.
Well, what would you say? How would you describe thinking something is true that categorically isn't? What word do you prefer? Because I'm keen to be generous.
Well, you're telling me now something that is different to what I've been instructed about, which is the fact.
Well, who instructed you, Jim?
Well, process is part of my job, so.
Yeah, who instructed you that the people who successfully apply for asylum in Rwanda get flown straight back to Britain?
No, they have a right. Then, if they're given...
No, they don't, Jim. But who instructed you this? Because if this is something that people in the British military are being instructed about, and it's categorically wrong, I'm 100% confident of that. We've got quite a big story on our hands, and I'll have to alert the news desk. So who told you that the successful applicants can come back to Britain?
James, I can't go into that. But...
Oh, you have to, Jim. Seriously. It's all right. I've signed the Official Secrets Act.
So have I.
So who told you that, Jim? James? Who told you that nonsense? Or have you just humiliated yourself on national radio?
No, not at all. And
so who told you that?
Perhaps, James,
who told you, Jim?
To some of your colleagues.
Possibly I do, Jim, but I'm listening to you. I'm listening to you at the moment. So who gave you this false information upon which you've based your entire support for a racist policy?
It's not, James, it's not a racist policy.
Mate, you didn't know what the policy was until I told you 3 minutes ago. How can you even have an opinion on it?
Well, I've been told the policy is
By whom?
very different.
Who told you that?
My superiors.
Now you're lying.
I'm not lying, James.
Okay, so who told you that successful applications in Rwanda, just give me the sort of job description of what they do or the rank.
James, this is just coming down through paperwork in how
Can I see the paperwork?
No, you can't see the paperwork.
Because it doesn't exist, Jim. Nor can you. It's imaginary paperwork.
James, listen.
I have listened. That's the problem, Jim. If I hadn't, you might have got away with some of this. But here you are, on a line.
Not at all.
The lips
James,
are moving.
This is part of a conversation, James. You're saying one thing.
No. I'm telling you the facts, and you're now spluttering inanely.
I'm not spluttering inanely.
Oh, no, you are. Again, that's another fact.
Not at all.
So, final chance. Who gave you the duff information about this?
James, it's duff in your opinion, and your opinion only.
It's not an opinion, Jim. It's written down in law.
James, it's not written in law.
Okay, Jim. You going to tell me who told you?
No.
Have a great day, mate.
And you. Bye-bye.
It's 10:49.
10:53 is the time, and no, I cannot categorically state that the last caller wasn't Mark Francois in disguise, as a lot of you are suggesting, but I'm fairly confident that it wasn't. I turn attention next to one of the other big crises, self-inflicted crises that the country is currently facing. Of course, the proposal to essentially break international law and tear up the treaty that Boris Johnson signed, the oven-ready one that was the will of the people and got him elected, that he is now seeking to abandon, despite the fact, of course, that the 2019 manifesto contained a pledge never to renegotiate or reopen negotiations on Brexit. And I thought we'd get a view from Dublin on this one, or at least from the Republic of Ireland, because it's a contribution to the conversation that possibly gets a little bit overlooked. I'm very glad, therefore, to welcome Neil Richmond onto the programme, the Fine Gael TD for Dublin Rathdown, and a spokesperson for that party, the spokesperson on European affairs. Neil, first of all, congratulations for making your own little advert before you came on the programme. I've just seen it on your Twitter page. I think we both look great there. I like that. Should be compulsory for contributors to the programme. Before we get into the detail of it, how do we look? How does Westminster look from Dublin at the moment?
Really, really badly. Unfortunately, and I say this with no joy because I love the United Kingdom. Most of my family live there. It's a great country, but your government is absolutely ruining the reputation of that once great country. And this is easily the lowest point in Anglo-Irish relations and indeed EU-UK relations, I'd say, not just since the Brexit referendum, but probably since the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998.
And I mean, you speak to family members here. You would probably still be slightly surprised by the distorting lens of the British media. Even impartial media, if you like, or balanced media, has to adopt a sort of two sides approach, as if, you know, that the United Kingdom is doing this, the European Union is doing that. Address the suggestion that the European Union is being stubborn or is being in some way complicit in the crisis.
Yeah, no, I've heard it quite a bit over the last couple of days that the EU is being intransigent, that the EU needs to change their mandate, that the EU wants to punish the UK and stop the benefits of Brexit. The EU is doing no such thing. You know, we never asked for Brexit, particularly those of us within Ireland never asked for it. And throughout this sorry process, the EU has consistently engaged, consistently negotiated, and consistently worked to produce solutions to the problems that Brexit presents. A lot of us spent quite a bit of time leading up to the referendum pointing out that our biggest fear about Brexit, you know, the people of the UK were more than free to make their own decision, but our biggest fear is it has massive impacts on the Good Friday Agreement, on the stability and peace of the island that I call home. We weren't listened to, we were ignored and we were dismissed, particularly by those who pushed this the hardest. And sadly, our Project Fear has become Project Reality. And yet we're being told it's all the EU's fault and the EU needs to change everything, where the British government haven't engaged in negotiation. Liz Truss has pulled stumps in negotiations on the 24th of February and has come back and thrown an absolute wrecking ball at the situation and is doing it in a way. You heard the Prime Minister yesterday so casually saying this is no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. It's my livelihood on the line. It's the livelihood of the people he represents on the line. And the last thing the people of Great Britain need is a trade war with its closest and most most important partner when there's an actual war in Europe, and we're all facing a cost of living crisis, albeit the data shows it's a little bit worse, sadly, for Great Britain due to Brexit.
Yeah, compared to Northern Ireland it is. But the idiot's guide, if you would, Neil, on the threats of the Good Friday Agreement, just talk us through the sort of salient points on that.
The whole thing is that Brexit requires checks. The British government has decided to leave the EU. Grand, we accept that. There's one land frontier between the UK and the EU, and that is the border within the island of Ireland. 499 kilometres, 208 recognised crossings. The British government has decided to go for a hard Brexit. They're not staying within the single market. They're not staying within customs union, and therefore that requires checks coming into the single market. My market. I want to make sure that my food is safe to eat, that the products coming in aren't going to burst up in flames. They meet proper standards. So where do we have the checks? You have to have them somewhere. The agreement is checks at 3 or 4 ports of entry on less than 3% of goods coming in from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, or the alternative, the potential requirement for checks across the entire border in Ireland. Anyone with a scant knowledge of history of these islands knows that that is a very delicate situation. It's a very difficult border. There's lots of things that are unstable in Northern Ireland at the moment, but the possibility of having to have customs inspectors at 208 recognised crossings, that's not talking about the boreens and back roads, 208 recognised crossings that were blown up in the past during really sad times that no one wants to go back to, no one thinks we will. That's what the risk is.
No, you say no one wants to go back to that. A couple of my callers yesterday suggested that perhaps the DUP do. Would you give that thought the time of day?
I don't know what the DUP want. I don't think the DUP know what they want. The DUP pushed Brexit the hardest in Northern Ireland. Yes. They held the balance of power in Westminster for 2 years and said no to everything. Even this legislation announced yesterday, one of the lines put out is this will get the executive back up and running. The DUP haven't said they've gone back into power on the back of this. They've given it a cautious welcome and let's see what happens. But yet we have a majority in the Northern Irish Assembly, a majority of members, a majority of parties writing to the Prime Minister saying, please don't go ahead with this legislation.
That's an important point that, again, has not been overly reported in this country. A majority of Assembly members saying don't do this. That's a majority of Northern Ireland's elected politicians saying don't do this thing that is being imposed upon them from London. It's, that's pretty huge, isn't it? In normal times, let alone, as you point out, in a time of crisis, international crisis.
Like, if we believe in democracy, if we believe in the rule of law, 52 out of the 90 MLAs elected only a couple of weeks ago, these haven't been in power a very long
52,
time.
It's always 52, isn't it? Flipping it.
Yeah, I know. 52 out of 90 elected, making it quite clear they don't want this to go ahead. We have all the business groups in Northern Ireland saying we don't want this to go ahead. It causes instability. And the very people that this is trying to appease aren't even sold by it either. I do not see who benefits from these proposals. Is it Liz Truss because she wants to be the next Prime Minister? Is it Boris Johnson because we're not talking about Partygate or whatever else since? Yeah. I had a responsibility earlier before I came on to go on radio with Andrew Bridgen in Ireland. And this is a man that called for the Prime Minister to resign a couple of months ago, that probably voted no confidence on him, out batting and defending his Prime Minister, because if in doubt, pick a row with the EU and the hardliners and the backbenchers will always rally the flag.
Yes, but of course he'll be getting his Irish passport soon, won't he, by dint of being a British citizen, Andrew Bridgen. I think that was a lesson he learnt last time he was on the radio over there, that perhaps it wouldn't be quite as straightforward as he thought. Neil, we should talk more. Thank you for that. And I wish we weren't in a situation where we should talk more, but as I suspect both of us appreciate, this situation is not going to get better any time soon. It's just gone 11 o'clock. I kept Neil on for a little late for reasons that I'm sure you understand. I guess one thing we've learned, that perhaps some of the support for the Rwandan plan is built upon ignorance. I mean, a deep failure to understand what it actually involves, but the rest of it is built upon appeal. It is designed to appeal to a certain type of person. Some people will admit to being that type of person, others will pretend desperately and somewhat embarrassingly that they're not that type of person, and that their support for it has nothing to do with a just simple schadenfreude at the thought of foreign people being treated abominably. I don't know what we're going to talk about next. You find out after the news. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Just 7 asylum seekers now due to be flown to Rwanda on that chartered removal flight at a cost of about £500,000, a 200-seater, so 193 There won't be empty seats, well, presumably there's guards and security personnel on board as well. We'll see if that figure comes down in the course of the day, and we may return to the conversation later in the week. But I thought we'd move on now. Do you know what I want to talk about later? Well, of course you don't, because I haven't told you yet. There's a very funny story. If you want to hear a 50-year-old man make an absolute twerp of himself, then make sure you're listening at 12 o'clock when I will address reports that the way in which we speak in this country is set to undergo a fairly profound change. What's the I mean, I would call it slang or patois, or I don't know what the correct phrase would actually be, but it is a kind of a way of speaking that is described as street slang. I'm getting this story out of the Daily Telegraph, so frankly, I'm banjacks from all angles on this one. Street slang is set to become Britain's main dialect, and it's what you might describe as multicultural London English, which I will have a crack at describing to you after 12 o'clock today, and then I'll try and find out as much as I can about it, really, because one of the most amazing discoveries I made on this programme many moons ago when I started doing it, when I started presenting it, was that it's not just privately educated middle-class men who change the way they speak depending on who they're talking to. I told you some time ago, I've only recently managed to, I don't think I've kicked the habit completely. I'm sure you catch me occasionally changing the way that I speak according to who's on the other end of the phone line, but I'm a heck of a lot better than I used to be. And I think the best place to test this theory is probably in car mechanic workshops or when you're talking to builders. And I used to sort of turn miraculously into the missing Mitchell brother whenever I was talking to somebody about building work. Even if they were Polish, for some reason I'd start sounding like the missing Mitchell brother straight out of Abbot Square. All right, mate, yeah, nice one. Anyway, how's about I'm getting better all the time. But I was very amused to learn many, many moons ago doing this job that some of the younger people, some of the kids who speak in this way, using terms such as peng and using man as a pronoun, don't speak like that at home. So they don't talk to their parents like that necessarily, but then once they're out on the streets, or the roads, as I believe we're supposed to call them, then so I just want to find out how widespread that is, and also how we feel about the possibility of the main dialect in Britain being this rather rich street slang, according to researchers at Oxford University. MLE speakers pronounce the consonant, unlike the Cockney speakers. They have now largely replaced in working class areas of London. So I'll give you the details later. I don't want to spoil it, but stay tuned because I will almost certainly be making a complete prune of myself. And I have no idea yet whether that would be peng or not peng. Is it unpeng? Is unpeng a thing? Can you say unpeng? That's so not peng. Is peng good? So not peng is bad. Pengless. No one wants to be pengless. That's not what we're going to talk about now, though. What we're going to talk about now is a subject we keep returning to, and we will continue to return to this subject until I stop finding it interesting, or I suppose until you stop calling me. Although, don't take the second one as a stone cold guarantee, because increasingly I find myself glancing at the clock 7 or 8 minutes into the introduction at the top of an hour and thinking to myself, I've got another half an hour. My comedian friends always talk about having 20 minutes of material, or I've got 20 minutes on this, or I sometimes start an introduction to the topic and think I could do a Steve Allen here. I could get to the end of the show without taking a single call if I'm in the right mood and I've got enough ginger in my smoothie, which oddly enough is not a figure of speech. But I just find it really interesting that, again, the Office for National Statistics releases facts that are rather hard to get your head around. The fact that pay has fallen sharply in real terms doesn't come as a massive surprise. That was the month when regulated energy prices jumped. So cost of living clashing head on with stagnant pay or below inflation pay rises is going to create precisely the problem that you just heard referred to in the news bulletin. We talked yesterday about this increasingly important cohort of people who have left the workforce and are not intending to return. People perhaps in their 50s, people mostly in their 50s being the most pertinent members of that cohort. But here's the thing, again, the employment rate has risen to 75.6% in the 3 months to April. That's up a little bit. It's up to 0.2, up by 0.2%. It's still down on pre-pandemic level, which is why Boris Johnson chooses his words very carefully when he's trying to claim that it's actually up on the pre-pandemic level. He talks about people, I think it excludes part-time or self-employed workers when he talks about people on the payroll. The actual number of people working is still, in percentage terms, lower than it was before the pandemic. But what is fascinating is the fact that there are now more vacancies. Again, there are more vacancies than there are unemployed people. And even with the looming economic squeeze, it seems fairly likely that things aren't going to be great next year, according to the OECD forecasts. We have 1.3 million unfilled jobs. So the number of full-time employees is at a record high. That doesn't take into account self-employed workers and part-time employees. But the number of full-time employees on company payrolls is at a record high. Okay? The number of people losing their jobs, the number of redundancies, is at a record low. And yet, the number of unfilled jobs is at a new record of 1.3 million. That's 1.3 million, if you like. If you think of the United Kingdom as a newsagent's window, there are 1.3 million postcards in the newsagent window advertising for jobs. Jobs currently not being done. Now, I as you know, I don't run a business by any stretch of the imagination. I don't understand this. I just don't understand it. It's a bit like the old magic eye things I sometimes refer to, those things that were popular in the 80s, and you'd stare at a picture that appeared to consist entirely of random squiggles, and if you stared at it for long enough and something weird happened to your eyes and your brain, then an image would emerge, like a lion or a steam train or something like that. I'm a great believer that if you stare at things for long enough, then sometimes the image will emerge. So what does this mean? I don't even want this hour to be political particularly. I mean, it can't be good, can it, to have so many vacancies if you are in business. And also, what is not happening, again for reasons I don't fully understand, possibly even remotely understand, employers are not offering ever enhanced packages in order to attract people to the huge number of jobs that are currently unfilled, presumably because they can't afford to. And this is where economic squeezes become problematic, isn't it? They come to the sort of point where you think, well, I can't actually afford to hire anyone new, so my business will shrink. That's what I want to find out. I've just got a simple Marvin Gaye question for you on this one. What's going on? So who can answer this best? I guess if you're trying to find staff, I'd like you to talk to me about what that's like. Should we start there? And if, like me, you're not trying to find staff at the moment, then we can do overviews of this. What I just want you to tell me what's going on. And look, I know that the abolition of freedom of movement is going to have been a huge factor in an awful lot of job vacancies going unfilled in this country. That's a given. And you're certainly not discouraged from making that point. Or forbidden from making that point. And I know it's a huge case of the pot calling the kettle black, but I'd like to go a little bit beyond Brexit on this. It is only really now the Daily Mail and a few headbangers in the Conservative Party who are pretending that Brexit has got nothing to do with any of the problems that the country is currently facing. I know it has, but I want more than that. I don't just want Brexit as the answer to this question. What does an epic number of unfilled job vacancies mean, either on a micro level, as in your business, your life, your company, 03456060973, or on a macro level, as in the country, the economy, society in general? Because it seems to me that this is a recipe for some sort of disaster, but I would really like somebody to explain to me why that is not necessarily the case. Let me give you that number, 03456060973. Full-time employees, record high. Redundancies, record low. Number of unfilled jobs, record high. And in its simplest terms, there are now more job vacancies in the United Kingdom than there are unemployed people. So even if every single person registered unemployed at the moment was ready for work and desperate to work, we'd still have a problem. not as big a problem, I don't imagine, but we would still have a problem. I just want you to talk me through what this means and what it says about the state of the nation and what it might be a forewarning of. There we go. No other qualification needed to contribute. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 11:15. It is 11:17, and it looks to me as if this is an unsustainable situation. Redundancies at record lows, number of full-time employees at a record high, number of unfilled jobs at a new record of 1.3 million. What does all this mean? Omi's in Barnet. Omi, what can you tell us?
Hi, I just wanted to try and unsquare the circle you've established. So you've asked, why aren't employers offering better packages?
Well, I know that because they can't afford to.
Right, now put on top of that, if you have no flexibility in increasing the price of your product.
Do I have your undivided attention at the moment, Omi? You sound a little bit distracted.
I'm multitasking.
Okay, well, when you're not
anyone to assist with my
task. I appreciate that. But when you're not multitasking, I'll come back to you. Okay, because 1.4 million people deserve, I think, the undivided attention of anybody ringing into the programme. So I mean that. I do want you to come back, but only when the most important thing you're doing is talking to my listeners. Sue's in Bognor Regis. Sue, what would you like to say?
I'd like to talk about why there aren't enough people in the workforce, I guess, and the impact that it's having. So I work in social care. I'm led to believe that 500,000 people in the country are waiting for social care and can't get it.
Where's that number from? Where did you pick that number from? Do you know?
Well, it's been sort of published. Right. I wouldn't be able to cite.
No, that's fine. No, it's your sector. I just crikey.
Maybe Age UK, I think, published something. But, so these are 500,000 people who've been assessed as needing care. Quite often it's either to get them out of hospital or to keep them safe and well in their own homes. So if they're not getting the care, that causes a backlog and, for things to pop up in other parts of the system.
Wow.
But the impact on staff, so as of last September in social care, we began to see something that we're calling the big resign, where people just started leaving. And I think the current turnover rate is 30% in social care because people are having to cover for colleagues who've had COVID. People are off for 10 days if they get COVID. I think everyone's really tired.
What's changed? So I can see. So you're understaffed and overworked, and that would contribute to the big resign, would it? But is that the only factor? Go on.
I understand that people are retiring earlier. So people in their 50s are leaving the workforce. I think they can either afford to do it, or because of COVID, they've just taken the decision that their life choices and priorities are different.
Right.
I think the impact of Brexit is about 5% on the workforce. And the issue is that people have left to go to jobs where they don't have to wear a mask and they don't have to, follow all the social care guidelines and be responsible for other people's lives.
So if there's 1.3 million job vacancies out there, it's easier than ever, I imagine, to move to a job that has slightly more bearable terms and conditions. And I know for someone like you, that working in social care is close to a vocation, but it's not for everybody, is it? For some people, it's just the job that was there when they were looking for a job.
Yeah, it's not for everybody, but I think it's a great sort of misunderstanding of what the job actually involves. I mean, I'm the managing director of a charity that supports people with learning disabilities and autism, and I've been covering some shifts because we're so short-staffed. We had a COVID outbreak last week. But really, the job is all about people. It's about relationships. It's about sort of just supporting, giving people enough support to sort of live a good life. And I think also the sort of the status of social care. A lot of people, I don't think, understand what it is. I think you think social care, you think care homes, and it's much wider than that.
Of course it is. I mean, we learn constantly about your sector on the programme, and I hesitate to ask you such a simplistic question, partly because I fear what the answer might be. But what does the light at the end of the tunnel look like? What does resolution look like on this, or improvement? Because, I mean, I can't really see what the answer to that question might be, Sue.
Well, I mean, maybe on the plus side, it's about sort of really seeing the potential for people to be more independent and less dependent on paid services. That's not always possible, but in many cases it is.
It's not quite. I mean, the shortage of social care could be solved by people using less social care.
Well, people may be using it in a different way.
Okay.
So if you look at employment, about 70% of people with a learning disability want to work, and only about 5% of them do. And it can.
Okay.
Those are NCAP figures.
But they still need looking after. But you mean they could earn money and pay for some of their social care? I'm failing to understand you. I apologise.
That's okay. No, it's there's a lot of sort of low expectations of people with learning disabilities. So
right.
If you get somebody with a learning disability into the right job, they will be the most fantastic employee you've ever had. They'll very rarely be off sick, and they'll do that job to the very best of their ability.
Of course, but how does this alleviate the shortage of workers in the social care sector?
Well, you're taking some people out of needing services because you're spotting the potential in them, and you're finding a way for them to find their place in society and make a contribution. I mean, we've supported over 1,300 people into work over the last few years. It can be done, but it's got to be very intentional. Okay.
So, I mean, you're talking about people who are in receipt of social care who possibly don't need it?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure that I understood you. I mean, that's not going to address the 500,000 people who are currently waiting to receive social care at all, but it's specific to the sector in which you work. Thank you for that, Sue. 0345 60 60973 is the number you need. What does this mean? The big overview, and also as an employer, what is it like trying to get staff at the moment? At pubs, every pub I go to, and I don't go to as many as I used to do, but I am no stranger. I was in Lewis at the weekend on Saturday. I told you most pubs had a staff wanted sign up in the window. My locals have staff wanted signs up in the window. Look, it's not an acid test of anything, but it is a mark, and that the signs are up for a long time. But how bad does it have to be before businesses are actually doing less business than they want to do because they can't get the bodies? Jamie's in Kenilworth. Jamie, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'm actually in part of this 500,000 or so people who are not classified as unemployed and such.
Okay.
And that's really happened very much since the pandemic. And I feel as though...
So you're not registered unemployed? You're not claiming any unemployment benefits?
No, I've never claimed unemployment
benefits. But you're not
benefits.
working?
Yeah, I'm not working, basically.
Okay.
I do a tiny bit of part-time stuff here or there, but essentially I'm not working.
Sure.
And a lot of that is childcare and the fact, we had kids. And during the pandemic, I had to look after them. And after that, it's been very hard to figure out, well, is anything I would do financially worth just the after-school care that the kids would, we had to pay for the kids. It doesn't add up.
Well, by the time you've done the calculation, it makes economic sense not to work.
Yes, exactly. And this way, you get to spend more time with your kids. You get to, basically help them grow better, take them out swimming, all that sort of stuff that you can't do otherwise.
Good grief. Your partner works, presumably. There is income coming into the house.
Yes, we're lucky in that state. And so she actually started working very luckily just before the pandemic started, and it was able to switch to remote and keep working. And that's also kind of why I haven't sought to go back, because...
What would tempt you back? I mean, I suppose there's an offer you couldn't refuse, is there? I mean, even with the calculations of childcare costs and things like that, if a very nicely paid job popped up, you'd be tempted, surely.
I think I would, but I think more than it just being nicely paid, a job has to be something that, for me at least, speaks to something that would actually be useful and contribute positively to society, right?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a luxury of choice, isn't it? But all choice, in a way, is a luxury. You do not need to worry about paying your bills while your partner is working, and therefore, to be tempted back into the workplace, it would have to be the full package, not just the remuneration, but also the satisfaction and the validation.
Yeah, and I think there's just a big mismatch out there at the moment of what jobs are available and, the opportunity cost to taking them. Like, it's too ridiculous, right? Like, let's say there's a job available, but I have to travel 4 hours a day to get to it.
And then you've got your petrol costs on top of that now, or your transport costs as well. So there is, I mean, where are these 1.3 million job vacancies? And what are they? Speaking in generic terms about them is probably unhelpful, although I'm not entirely sure at this point in proceedings that we have much choice. There's a good piece apparently on another radio station, this texter tells me last week, explaining why there are a low number of people unemployed and lots of jobs that need to be filled. Unemployed is a very specific group of people who are currently looking for work and available for work in the next 2 weeks. That's the definition. There is a much larger group of people, into which I think Jamie slots, who are not able to work or who do not want to work, who are often over 50 and they've left the workforce. Well, actually, we did that on the show yesterday. What are you talking about other radio stations for? We addressed that yesterday. But also under 50s, younger people like Jamie, who are just slightly recalibrating and recalculating, which many people listening will find almost impossible to understand, because you're struggling to make ends meet at all as things stand. So the idea that you could step back from the workplace seems incomprehensible. But childcare costs are incredible. I think a lot of people run at a loss on their childcare costs in the preschool years when you're having to pay for nursery care and you don't want to leave the workplace for a variety of reasons. Key among them, I think, is the fact that you worry that you won't be able to return at the level you left at, or it's simply the case that you don't want to. But you can often run at a loss on a modest salary. By the time you've paid for all of the childcare, you're barely turning a profit on it, but you're hanging in there until they start school, at which point your childcare costs should plummet. It's coming out to 11:30. What does this mean, either on the big picture, the macro level, or on the micro level? What is it doing to your business? And how realistic is it to say that you can't find staff for love or money? 0345 6060 973. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. 31 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 5 years to the day since my worst ever day at work. I sort of started receiving reports as I made my way to work, and I used to get a car into the studio in those days, that a tower block in West London had caught fire, and that the scenes being witnessed there were beyond belief. And then, of course, very, very, very shortly after that, a blog emerged, a community blog emerged, in which warnings had been shouted, screamed, metaphorically speaking, about the state of refurbishment and the presence of dangers in Grenfell Tower. We've spoken often to the one of the men responsible for that blog, and today it is 5 years later, and no one has yet been held accountable for what went on that night. And many, many, many buildings in this country, as Rachel Venables has done more than perhaps anyone else in the British media to report, remain covered in the kind of cladding that contributed so catastrophically to the tragedy that night. Natasha Elcock is the chair of Grenfell United, herself a survivor of the tragedy. And Grenfell United, you will know, is a group of bereaved and surviving families. And Natasha joins me now. What is the community doing today, Natasha, to commemorate the 5th anniversary?
So good morning, James. So there's quite a few things going on in the community today. I believe there's a service taking place at Westminster Abbey this morning. There is some community groups that are kind of opening their doors for community to come along. And later this afternoon at 4 o'clock, we will be holding a multi-faith service at the base of the tower for the bereaved and surviving families, and all the community are welcome to join and will come along and do that. And then subsequently later on in the evening, we will attend the annual silent walk, which we do every 14th of June.
It is. I don't know if it's a day to do the questions about where we are with regards to the inquiry. I'll take your guidance on that.
Yeah. So we're now coming to the end of the inquiry, which has obviously been a long and painful realisation of the truth. And, you spoke about the blog that was written pre-fire, and a lot of that has come to light now of how true that blog, the predictions that blog made and others made, has come to light. And the various different elements, the different corporates and, the inaction of government pre-fire and the inaction of them post-fire and local authorities, the list is endless, James, as you're well aware. But as we come close to the end, I think you got to think about it. We had recommendations in 2019, and more recently the government chose to water down one of the key recommendations that the judge did. So, whilst we've been really patient with the process and, the first set of recommendations, you always come to the end of this part. And if the government, a month or two before it ends, turn around and say, well, we're not going to implement a key recommendation, what's the point in the whole process? This is all going to be kicked into the long grass. And, the same way it was after Lacknell House. It's, for us, the inquiry's been tough, but it has unearthed some of the truth.
One of the lines that I associate most completely with your group is the line about we don't want our 72 to be remembered for what happened, but for what changed. And I suppose what you're speaking to at the moment is a fear that not enough will change necessarily.
Well, we're 5 years on now, and, I sat here this morning thinking, well, what has really changed? We've had a lot of talk, we've had a lot of promises, but, on paper, can we really say much has changed? As you mentioned, Rachel Venables, she reports almost daily about the issues that are going on. So it just goes to show that even though we've reached 5 years today, nothing, there has been no substantial change, and people are still unsafe in their homes, and the government's still not enacting on what they need to do.
Another thing I've been taught by Grenfell United and others is the danger of asking questions about the whole community, because there will be things upon which people disagree with each other, even though they're united in grief and they're united in a desire to see change. You won't always be in 100% unanimous agreement about what form that change should take. Most obviously, I suppose, with the site of the tower, actually, and the future of the site of the tower. But I would ask you to say a few words, if you would, about how the area, the people who live in the area have moved and changed over the last 5 years, because it is impossible, I think, to explain to anybody who hasn't seen it or who hasn't been there just how long a shadow the tower still casts.
So, as you rightly mentioned, everyone will have a different opinion. You can't get a unanimous viewpoint in it. But if I give you my personal opinion, I lived in that block for 20 years. I lived on the whole estate for my whole life, which is nearly 40 years at the time of the fire. And the whole reason that building was cladded because of how ugly it looked. And it was, obviously, the fire happened, and that building stands as a reminder of what's not changed, a reminder of the fact that justice hasn't served. But this is my personal opinion, and I appreciate, it's difficult for others to look at it. But, you're more than aware that, the government decided to leak a story to the Times last September around the fact that they were going to demolish the tower without consulting the people that matter the most, the bereaved survivors, and the uproar that caused and the upset it caused. And for us, the biggest thing is that people are consulted, and it is done in conjunction with the people, because that is a mass graveyard. Yeah. We know the levels of details. The bereaved know what was, how their family members came out. So to just make a decision, it needs to be done in conjunction with the bereaved families first and foremost, and the survivors, as that was their home, and the local community. There are many different opinions, and we respect that. We're never going to come to 100% unanimous point on it. But for me, if you look at the skyline that dominates around the tower, you look at the Westfield complex, you look at the tower blocks that are flying up around there. For me, is that more around what the developers want? Do they want to sell those properties? And Grenfell staring potential buyers in the face is not a good look. You can, all different conspiracies. But for us, the main thing is we are still probably 4 or 5 years away from justice. So whilst today is 5 years and the inquiry's coming to an end, we've still got to wait for the report. We've still then got to wait for the CPS to decide if they're going to file any charges. We've then got to get it to court before we even know if anyone is going to, be found guilty for any sort of charge that's brought to them. So we are probably still another 4. We may talk in 5 years' time, James, and I may say to you that we still haven't had justice.
We may be having the same conversation.
So because that's the reality. That's the reality of what this community is living with. Whilst the fire was 5 years ago, we're only probably halfway through the actual process, because we're probably another 4 years away.
And of course, the ugly precedents of Aberfan and Hillsborough go before you, don't they?
Exactly, absolutely. And we can only live in hope that we don't become another Aberfan or Hillsborough.
Are the lines of communication with government open, Natasha? When you talk about consultation, and you rightly recall that appalling sort of breach of confidence, really, with the leaked suggestion that the tower would be demolished. Are the lines of communication better now than they were then?
So there has been attempts for the most recent Secretary of State, and obviously the leak to the Times was the previous Secretary of State. There has been attempts, there has been community meetings, but it's still so raw. We haven't even got to the part of inquest function yet. That's still got to happen for the bereaved. So before people can actually